This week, in honour of Earth Day, we welcome onto the show Annabel Thomas, founder of the Nc'Nean Distillery, who won Sustainable Distillery of the Year at the recent Icons of Whisky Awards.
And together with Annabel, we sample the Nc'Nean Organic Single Malt Scotch Whisky, as well as talk about their fascinating story and sustainability in the whisky making process.
As always, you can find some more whiskey-based content, images and videos, etc. on all our social media platforms at Whisky and Things Podcast on Instagram and at Whisky and Things on Facebook and Twitter.
And it would help us out if you rate, review and subscribe on all of your favourite podcast platforms, because we know you use more than one.
You're listening to the Whisky and Things Podcast with Dave Giles and Nick Kent.
Welcome to episode 57. This should be the Heinz episode, Nick. I'm Dave Giles.
And I'm Nick Kent. There's only one variety of us, Dave.
That's a good point.
You know?
That is a good point. How you doing?
I'm all right, thank you. We're doing this a bit earlier in the normal week. This is a Friday for us.
Yes, I'm taking a couple of days off because it's my birthday, Nick. It's my birthday.
Unbelievable.
I know, right? So this actually is my birthday episode. It comes out on my birthday. Didn't think about that, did you? What have you got me? Nothing. Classic Kent.
We're actually recording on my birthday when that comes up.
Good point.
You know? Didn't think about that, did you?
Ordered your birthday present this week, just so you know.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh,
I'm quite excited about it.
Interesting. That's made it awkward.
Although technically it's a pre-order, but you know, I'm not sure if that's a little giveaway.
Oh, everyone knows now. I'm gonna
Hopefully it will arrive by May the 3rd.
Fantastic. Look forward to it.
Anyway, this episode, which is my birthday episode, I decided we were going to do this months ago. I was like, Nick, we're going to do an Earth Day episode, and I've found the perfect guest. And we have found the perfect guest. So, for those of you who don't know, what is Earth Day? Well, it's an annual event on April the 22nd to demonstrate support for environmental protection. First held on April 22nd, 1970.
Blimey, I didn't know that. I thought it was quite a new thing.
It now includes a wide range of events coordinated globally by earthday.org, including 1 billion people in more than 193 countries. How do they count all those people? They just know. So yeah, this is the 51st year of Earth Day. We recorded this interview way back on the 24th of February. That's how prepared we were for this, because our guest was going on maternity leave. So we wanted to make sure we could get this happening.
Yeah.
But sustainability in whiskey has been a bit of a buzz. There's a lot of chat about it, particularly in the Scotch world. There's a Scotch whisky sustainability strategy which commits to being carbon net zero by 2040. And to do that, they're talking about using more reusable, recyclable and compostable packaging and help conserve Scotland's landscape and peatlands. And especially the big thing here is water efficiency. So there's quite a lot about this being discussed within the industry. But there is no greater example, in my opinion, Nick, and I think you'll agree, than what is going on at Nc'Nean Distillery.
Indeed. And it's become more relevant that we have the founder of Nc'Nean on, because they became Sustainable Distillery of the Year at the Icons of Whisky Awards recently.
Congratulations.
Yes. So it's lucky we interviewed her back in February.
Absolutely. We may not have got the opportunity now they're icons.
Exactly. We're talking, of course, about Annabel Thomas.
Yes.
Founder of Nc'Nean. And this was an awesome interview.
We had a great time.
Did have a good time.
And we got to try some of their organic single malt scotch. It's obviously going to be our whiskey of the week. So enjoy this interview and whiskey tasting with Annabel Thomas, founder of Nc'Nean Distillery. Welcome to Whisky and Things, Annabel Thomas from Nc'Nean Distillery. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hello.
It's a real pleasure to have you on, particularly on Earth Day. We feel like it's really appropriate that you're with us. So before we get started hearing more about the actual distillery, can we hear about your background in terms of how you got involved with even the concept of running your own distillery?
Yes. So my background is not very close to whiskey at all. I used to be a strategy consultant in London, working for a big consulting firm, and we consulted to big corporates. So very much a corporate job. The idea for a whiskey distillery originally our distillery is on my parents' farm, and that was where the very original idea came from. It was a family idea, and we'd throw it around the table at meal times, and I took some time off from my time as a consultant, really just to have some fun, because they let you take time off, which is very generous of them. And I said to my family that I would go do some research for this project that we've been talking about, because we just kept talking about it and doing nothing about it. And it was really through doing that research that I really got into it. And 6 months later, I just handed my notice in and thought, when am I ever going to get the chance to start a distillery again? And leapt.
Wow.
And that was nearly 8 years ago.
Wow. So then what happened? It was I'm assuming you had to try and raise the funds, I guess.
Exactly. So I had in this research period, I had done quite a few distillery tours, and I had the realization that, well, I felt like there wasn't enough focus on sustainability in the industry, and maybe there also wasn't enough focus on creativity. It seemed to be very traditional, there's absolutely a role for that. And part of Scotch's beauty is that it's very traditional, but there's also a role for people to not always think in the traditional way. And I think that's the great thing about a new distillery, is you kind of have the freedom to do that a bit more. So that became like the mission. But yes, we then had to go through the extremely painful process of raising money, which took us 2 years. We then had to go through the equally painful process of actually building the distillery, which took another 2 years. And then finally, 4 years after I'd left my old job, we actually started producing whiskey. And then you have to wait another 3 years before we can put it in a bottle.
Yeah.
But you can see the barriers to entry are high here.
Exactly. I think that would be a fair definition. So, yeah, it's a very long-term process. But, each milestone is important. And certainly when that first spirit starts coming off the still, it's pretty cool.
And then, of course, your first spirit is ready in 2020, which is just the worst year, right? I mean,
well, and the irony is we thought it was quite a cool year because it sounded like a nice round number and memorable, but little did we know.
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, sustainability is at the core of what you're doing. Give us more insight into that thought processes and what steps you have then made within building your distillery to make sure that is at the heart of what you're doing.
Well, I guess the reason why is because I feel like on a personal level that every person, but maybe more importantly every business, because they can actually have a big impact, has a responsibility really to do what they can to address the fact that the world is getting hotter and that is causing us massive issues, but also tackle some of the other sustainability challenges we have that are not directly global warming related, like biodiversity loss, for example. And there are lots of great examples of businesses doing that already. It felt like when I was looking at it, there wasn't enough focus on that in the whiskey sector. And I think that has changed a lot and is still changing. But I really wanted us to be at the forefront of it. And even though as a relatively small player, we're not going to have a huge impact, hopefully we can have a bigger impact by encouraging other people to move the same way. And I think that is already happening, which is great. So the thought process, and I guess the other important element for us is that we are located somewhere incredibly remote. So there is both the kind of emotional, but also practical need and encouragement to work with nature, because that's actually what's around you. So there was also that side of it as well. So when we started out, I decided just to pick the really big obvious things and make sure that we were prepared for those. So that was where we got our energy from, because distilling is a super energy intensive process. So we are lucky that we have a commercial forest right by the distillery, and we can harvest trees for there and use them in a biomass boiler and replant everything we harvest. So it's a carbon neutral process. The second big part of the kind of impact of a distillery is where you get your raw materials from, but primarily your barley. So we made the decision to only buy Scottish organic barley, which has been an interesting journey as well, because that was done. We made that decision purely for environmental reasons. Basically, I feel like we have a responsibility to protect all down our supply chain, not just what happens in our little domain at the distillery. And choosing organic just means the kind of biodiversity and stuff on those farms is amazing. You go and visit them, it's nothing like a normal farm. But we think it might also have had an impact on the taste of the whiskey, which was entirely unexpected, but pretty cool.
We'll get onto that later, I'm sure.
Exactly. And then the other two big things are water and waste. So both of those we kind of designed in from the beginning. Most of the water usage in a distillery is not actually to go into the whiskey. It's to cool the vapour that comes off the stills. Normally, distilleries would either extract from a river and then put back in, which is not great for the river environment, or they would install a cooling tower to mechanically cool, but that requires chemicals and electricity. We don't have a river, and we didn't really want to go down the cooling tower option because it's energy intensive and it requires chemicals that we didn't really want to use. So we ended up digging a pond, which the engineers didn't like at all because they couldn't calculate sufficiently accurately that this was going to provide us with enough cooling just by effectively evaporation and rainwater addition and things. So they were very nervous about it, but it's worked out just brilliantly.
So that's effectively a worm tub as a condenser, as a pond, or is it a different concept?
No, it's not. So we have a giant pond, and the water from that pond is pumped through a normal copper condenser.
Okay, right.
So if normally you would have through a copper condenser water from the river, we're just drawing it from the pond, but we draw it from one end of the pond, put it back in the other end, and it's just a closed loop system.
Okay.
So there's no impact on the environment kind of outside of that one pond.
Right. It's not getting washed away anywhere else. That's it.
It's not getting washed away. Yeah. It just stays as one thing.
And are you trying to, sorry, this may sound really, really a silly question. Are you trying to make sure that there's no species settling in that pond, which therefore could be affected by that? Or does that not make a difference? It
doesn't really make a difference, but also the nature of the pond is that we're not going to get many species settling in it. It's like a lined pond. We haven't got it. We've sort of, there's nothing growing in it to make it attractive, and we kind of want to keep it like that. It's just our body of water for cooling.
Right. It's topped up from the rain as
exactly.
required.
So we actually, it sits below our warehouses, and the warehouses obviously have this massive roof surface area which catches a lot of water, and we just put that water into the pond.
Amazing. That's very clever.
But interestingly, it also means that and this happens everywhere, but if you're using a river, it does mean that the temperature of our cooling water changes over the year, but probably in a more extreme way than you would get if it was a river. And so we actually adjust the recipes of spirit that we make in the distillery around that.
Oh, wow.
Nice. So you'll have seasoned varieties of whiskies as we go on.
Exactly.
Very nice. So the one other thing you mentioned was waste. Obviously, water waste is a big part of that. But
yeah, exactly.
There's then obviously other materials in the distribution of the whiskey, right? Which I'm assuming is
yes, exactly. Well. And to begin with, it was actually the distillery what is called effluent, which is just such a horrible word, but it's basically the solids from the barley draft and the leftover liquid in the stills, and both of those go back to the farm. So again, a very natural process. The cows eat the draff, the pot ale spread on the field as fertilizer, and that was I guess all the stuff that we built in from the beginning. Those were the big things. But then, of course, once you start operating a distillery, you quickly realise there's all sorts of other things that you need to think about. There's the chemicals that you need to use to clean the equipment, and then you get onto a product, and it's this packaging. And so, our approach to sustainability the kind of mission has always been there, but we've had to adapt what we're doing and continually improve as we go. And that's still, we're still in that process. Nobody is perfect. And we've still got a long way to go.
Whiskey! One thing I have read about you is that as far as you're aware, you're using the first 100% recycled bottle. And I understand it was quite a process to find that. Can you tell that story?
Yes. So obviously when you set up a whiskey distillery, you're most focused on just laying stock down, and the actual concept of having whiskey in a bottle still seems like it's a lifetime away. And so I hadn't really planned any packaging sustainability strategy, like big strategy or anything when we started. It was like, oh God, that's ages away. So whiskey's approaching, and we start looking into it and thinking, what are our options here? And there are not many great options out there when you start looking at it. And we wanted a clear bottle because I think it's really nice for consumers to be able to see what's in the bottle. And you look at clear bottle options, and they're all made with like 80% plus virgin materials. Right. I think this is completely bonkers. We're not sourcing, like the cardboard that we're sourcing is not virgin. Why would we use that for glass? So one of my team, Amy, who is both our visitor manager and head of sustainability, as is wont in small companies, people have very broad roles, set herself the task of calling up all the big glass manufacturers in the UK and some in Europe saying, we want a high percentage recycled glass, clear glass bottle. And we just got no. And I get it, because these guys work in like massive furnaces and it's not like they can just suddenly switch them off and do something special for us. But their view was, well, everyone who wants a clear bottle wants like flint clear glass that's super shiny, super premium. So we'd kind of given up hope. And we then ended up finding this amazing company that make our 100% recycled clear glass bottle at a trade show in Berlin, of all places. And Amy and I were there. It was just the two of us. And it was before the show started. We walked up to this stand. There was no one on it. And it said 100% post-consumer recycled glass. We're like, and to begin with, I was a bit like, how has Amy managed to not find this so far? And it turns out that was the day they were launching.
Wow.
Right.
We were already halfway through our bottle design process with a completely different shape, but we're like, this is it. This is amazing. So we had to ditch all the bottle design we'd already done, take one of their bottles. And it's one of those lucky things. Right place, right time.
Yeah.
We managed to find them in enough time that we could redesign everything before launch. But so yeah, it's very cool. And it's a project they've been working on for 5 years. It's been enormously difficult for them to put in place, but they managed it. And yeah, it's amazing. And the result is that every glass bottle that we use has a 40% lower carbon footprint than one with a much higher recycled content. So It really makes a difference.
That's that's a huge difference, isn't it? It's a huge difference. And something else that I, as a consumer, am very aware of is the amount of packaging that goes on within whiskey in terms of gift boxes and tins and things like that. Do you think that's something else that we need to be considering here and the industry needs to be looking at? They're very pretty and they make great displays and things like that.
Yeah.
But one, do you do it? And two, do you think it's something that is sustainable and something we need to talk about?
Yes, and yes. So we spent a long time thinking, should we even have a gift box? And the conclusion we came to was, let's do one and then let's incentivize people not to take it. So for the people for whom it's really important, or for who are actually giving it as a gift and it substitutes some kind of other gift packaging, I sort of don't have a problem with that, because if it's one thing or other, they might as well have the convenience of us supplying it. So on our website and for all of our trade customers, they have the option of buying a without gift box bottle. It's caused enormous complexity for us because you end up running double the amount of products you have to have otherwise. And it's just really little things. Like you have to have different barcodes for both. So if it's not going in a gift box, you've got to put a barcode on the bottle. If it's...
Oh, wow.
But what has been even more interesting is that everyone's still buying the bloody gift box.
Shouldn't make it so pretty.
Well, I know.
If you got a very pretty bottle, and a pretty gift box, people are going to want it.
I know. So we actually put something on social media last week about it, and everyone was like, why don't you make it ugly? And we're like, that's not really the point, is it? Because then that's totally pointless.
So you think that it's one of those things that the wider community needs to do, and also as consumers, we need to start asking ourselves that serious question: do I actually need this gift box? And we shouldn't necessarily put it just on the manufacturers, but I think if more manufacturers had it as an option, like you do, despite the fact it makes it more complex. And then it's down to you, because some people as well.
I think that's right.
Nick, for example, has a wonderful display of his gift boxes from individual bottles. And when you get your first one, it's great, but you don't necessarily need it for your second one. Like you can have that wall display of your lovely gift boxes, but then you don't necessarily need it for everyone after that. And to have that option to not do that.
Exactly. And I guess we're also still, we don't yet know, because we're still so early in our journey, about we don't know whether the reason so many people are buying gift boxes is because the first bottle, they want to do exactly what you described, which is keep that one gift box, and then afterwards they're going to buy it without. Yeah. So we might discover that the proportion of people buying gift boxes declines significantly, at which point, brilliant. And that's kind of totally what we set out to do, to give people who really want that gift box the option of having it once and then not buying it again. But we don't know. We're kind of still on that journey, but I think it's incumbent on distilleries to give the option, and also when these things go into bars, literally you talk to a bartender, they're like, it's just more unpacking and more recycling I have to do. And what a horrendous thought.
Yeah.
So when the on-trade reopens, I really want to try and make sure that our without gift option is what's getting through wholesalers into bars, because that is just the most horrendous waste for it. Just
Absolutely.
Not to,
Talking of the wider implications of that, though, do bars always need a new glass bottle, even a glass bottle? Because they must waste a hell of a lot. Do you know if there is other research or ideas and thought process within the industry on how that can be improved? For example, with beer, we have kegs, right? And the keg and the brewery come around, take the keg back, refill it, and it gets reused. I know that's more complex with whiskey because it's a different kind of product, but is that being discussed?
It is. This is a very controversial topic.
I think of it going backwards, because that's how like the bottled and bonded thing came about, because whiskey used to come in barrels and the bars used to do it themselves. So that's why they ended up bottling it. So, but as you say, is it coming back?
Well, there is a major barrier, which is that you are not allowed to decant or do anything with single malt Scotch whisky outside of Scotland.
Unless you teaspoon it, but then it can't be called Scotch and all that kind of stuff.
But then it's not single malt Scotch.
Yes.
So, for example, there's lots of cocktail companies at the moment who are doing delivery to the door type cocktails. We have to send them retail bottles because they're all based in England, because we're not allowed to send them unless we teaspoon it, which is something that we have given serious thought to, but I'll come back to that, because we can't send it in bulk outside Scotland, which is just, in my mind, completely ridiculous. Like, I understand why it was done, but that was in literally a different century and for completely different reasons. And the world has moved on so much. So that's like a small example, but there are companies doing really amazing things on a much bigger scale and trying to change the bar industry. And they're called Eco Spirits. They started in Asia and they're coming to the UK, and they have these like keg equivalents basically for spirits. They're smaller, obviously, but they're refillable, and you just send an IBC of the spirit and they have this amazing like refill system. So
wow.
Okay.
It's happening, but again, unless we teaspoon our single malt and call it blend, which we can do, but it's so confusing. I mean, Scotch is confusing enough for consumers as it is without any of that rubbish. We can't participate.
That's very frustrating. And I guess the hard part about that, especially as a new distillery, is you can probably see English distilleries who can participate in those things and you can't compete with them. Because I'm assuming if you're going down that route, it probably also becomes cheaper for you to be able to do wholesale to bars.
Of course. I'd much rather send them a 10-litre drum that they can do with, a 10-litre drum and 6 empty bottles. Yeah, they can refill them and put them on the back bar. It offers great value to the bar. It's also better for us. It's better for the environment. It's just seems like a no-brainer. But
yeah, so hopefully progress will be made there. Because on the whole, the Scotch industry is taking this seriously, right? For example, there is a campaign to be net zero by 2040 with a sustainability strategy. I think that was announced earlier this year. That's a conversation that's been going on for a couple of years. Do you feel like you were one of the people that started that conversation, or do you think it was happening anyway, and now rightfully that they're actually making impact here?
No, and I think so you're right, it is going on, and the SWA have done a good job of that. I think that, and it's been going on before we were even known about. I hope we are having an impact. Like, we do get the bigger distillers coming undercover to see what we're doing. Nice. And then implementing some of that stuff at their distilleries, which is pretty cool.
Are we seeing more ponds?
No, the ponds doesn't seem to have taken on so much, but biomass boilers are, which is amazing.
Cool. Well, that's cool.
Replacing oil and gas. So that is cool. And we know that there is at least one big distillery being built with a biomass boiler, and they came to see ours before they chose to have it there, which is great. Bruichladdich have just done the same as what we do and now do optional tins on their website. Again, no idea whether they did that because we did it or because they thought it was the right thing to do and didn't know we did it. But I think we are starting to have a small impact, and that is what I would like to see, really, because it's all very well us doing exactly the right thing, but if
no one else does, then
if no one else does, it's a small impact. And if we can we'll have a much bigger whole environmental impact if we can influence the rest of the industry as well. So that being said, I think net zero in 2040 is too late.
Yeah, I agree.
But it's a step in the right direction.
Did I not read? I mean, that was obviously January of this year when that got announced, but there were other targets before that, and the whiskey industry seemed to be very much ahead. I think it may not just be it's a target that's not just for the Scotch industry, it's for industries on the whole. and the Scotch industry on the whole is ahead of where it should be compared to other industries in terms of trying to get to carbon neutral. If I'm correct in that, do correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't know exactly, but I think you're right. And I think that's against government targets. And then the question is, that the government targets aggressive enough? So
yeah, of course. So what would you like to see happen across the, is there something further you would like to see happen? Obviously, as you said, it can't be perfect. There's still, as you say, the chemicals and all the other things that need to happen. Is there one thing that you think could be a silver bullet in helping the industry to become more sustainable? Is there one thing that you've discovered in setting up the distillery that you think is a really obvious thing that could make such the biggest amount of difference?
No.
Or is it lots of little things?
And I think that's the thing about sustainability. It's really complex and really hard. And in particular, the challenge for the rest of the industry who are not new distillers is that they've got all this really expensive infrastructure and it's really expensive to change it. And I get it. Like, we were really lucky that we set ourselves up at a time where there were alternatives. But, you know, to retrofit boilers, to rip out good oil boilers and replace them with a more expensive renewable alternative is costly. And that is going to happen slowly. And I think that's understandable.
Which is where you want the government to come in, really, and try and help out.
And the government have come in, like they're sponsoring this Green Distilleries project at the moment, which is basically looking at green hydrogen and what role that can have in distilleries. So that is moving in the right direction. I think there are a couple of smaller things like chemicals. So on chemicals, most people use caustic to clean both their kind of mash tun and washbacks and also their wash still generally. We have replaced half of our caustic use. And caustic, by the way, is very energy intensive to make and also not very nice to work with and not very good to dispose of. We've replaced half of that usage with an enzyme called EnzyBrew. It's developed for the brewing industry and it's halved our caustic usage, which is amazing. We haven't done enough shouting about it yet, so I don't know how many other people actually know about it. But that is something that everybody could do immediately. I think the biggest thing, which is not the silver bullet, but it is a big thing, is packaging. Yeah. And just really lightweighting bottles, really going for higher renewable. Like, if the big guys turned around to these bottle manufacturers and said, I don't want Flint clear glass, they would change because they're the biggest customers. So that is super simple. And also I was told a story by one of the Scandinavian monopoly buyers that they had tried to order a product from Scotland, I don't know what it was, without a gift box. And they were told, we can't do that, but we could send it in a gift box and unpack it at the border for you and throw the gift boxes away. You're like, come on, that is not an okay answer. So I think being more radical on packaging is something that people could do much more quickly than they can retrofit to some kind of renewable energy boiler in a massive plant, which is obviously very difficult in CapEx.
Aren't Johnny Walker bringing in a paper bottle or something soon?
They are. Let's see how much of Johnny Walker ends up in that bottle.
Okay.
I mean, that's the test. They made a brilliant song and dance for it.
Yeah.
We haven't seen it on the shelves yet. If it's 1% of their output, then
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's a very valid point.
But I will reserve judgment until we see it. But
I mean, obviously we say all this. There is no perfect strategy, is there? Because in a perfect world, we all distill our own whiskey and drink, and do it so locally. But we do want to taste whiskey we want to taste whiskey from all over the world, and we as consumers want that, and we want to try a multitude of different distilleries, and just the transport of all of that is a nightmare, and the world is set up that way, unfortunately, and we've just got to constantly be asking other questions of, okay, if we want to do that, if we want to try Tasmanian whiskies, Nick, can those Tasmanian whiskies make sure that what they're doing is sustainable enough? So if that last little bit of getting it to the consumer is the really hardest part to make net zero, and it might not be the hardest part, I don't know, but if that is the hardest part, then we can have that conversation across multiple industries, not just the whiskey industry, because that's about transporting goods and all those kind of things.
I think that's right. And I also think we have to acknowledge, we as Nc'Nean have to acknowledge that we are making a luxury product that no one needs. This is not vegetables that people need. So to some extent, we are also part of that problem, which is mass consumerism and people consuming a lot of stuff that they don't need.
Absolutely.
But, that's where we are in the world.
But we still want to be happy, right?
Exactly. And I figure if people are going to buy expensive whiskey anyway, they might as well buy sustainable, expensive whiskey.
Oh, absolutely.
whiskey butts roll out.
So I've never tried your whiskey. So I'm looking forward to this and to trying this. So talk us through. It says we've got batch 2. The date it was drawn was the 20th of November, 2020. And it's 46%. That's the information that we have. So,
great.
How much have you released, and how much are you planning on releasing this year, and all that kind of stuff? Give us a bit more information about the whiskey we've got and what we can expect from it.
Okay, perfect. So we released our first whiskey in August last year. We release them in batches, which is, literally how we make it. That's why we do it. We like to be transparent and tell people about what it is that we're doing. Mm-hmm. And what it is they're drinking. So you can find all the information about any batch you've got on our website. So every batch at the moment is about 5,000 bottles. That will change a little bit over time because we're building a new bottling building, and that will allow us to do slightly larger batches. So we are on batch 5 at the moment, is what you'll mostly buy if you buy something in the shops. And we are doing the cask selection for batch 6 this week.
Nice.
This week. So at the moment, we have just one product out there, which is what you have in front of you. That will change over time. We'll add more products to the range, but not in the next few months. So what you have is it's our core single malt. It's a mixture of 65% STR casks, red wine, ex-red wine casks, and 35% bourbon barrels. So each batch is roughly the same mixture, but obviously it is different casks that go into each batch. So there is a small amount of natural variation. Exactly. We were aiming for something delicious, obviously, but also we hope we have achieved something which is kind of fruity, smooth, and a little bit spicy. It also happens to work really well in a whiskey soda, which is one of our favourite serves, and something that we spend quite a lot of time thinking about.
Right. 4 years aging, or do you just bring it out when it's ready?
This is 3 years old,
right?
What you've got. We don't have any 4-year-old yet. The first barrels will turn 4 at the beginning of April. So later this year, you'll probably start seeing batches that have at least some 4-year-old in, although by that point we won't be able to tell you it's got some 4-year-old in, because that would also be against the rules.
Yeah, of course.
So I'll tell you now, and then it won't be shown on the website.
You can definitely smell the spiciness. I don't know if you're getting that, Nick.
I was getting kind of orchard fruits, peach.
Oh yeah,
that kind of thing.
Yeah, we say stone fruits, exactly. Peach, apricot.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
It's quite herbal as well for me. On the nose.
When you mentioned earlier about the organic barley, what stage did that affect the taste or the smell? Where has that come in and changed what you thought you were going to deliver? Is that the spiciness or?
No, I think we think, but we don't have any proof of this because we only make organic. So we've not got a side-by-side comparison of this is what our distillery and our yeast and all the rest of it would make if it wasn't organic. So it's definitely hypothetical, but we think it gives us kind of body and viscosity and depth, sort of beyond its years. And the reason we think it does that is because every grain of organic barley has got a bit more fullness of flavour to it. They're generally lower yielding. So if you like, the goodness of the soil is spread over fewer actual grains.
Right.
And it's had to fight a bit harder in its life to grow because it's not had all that help from fertilizers and things, which makes it develop more complexity within the grain.
Yeah. So on your website, you retreat your red wine casks. Do you rechar them?
Yes. So they are shaved, toasted and recharred.
Lovely.
So that recharring process really caramelizes the wine sugars that are already present in the cask.
Yeah.
And gives a lot of the spicy profile that you taste in the whiskey.
Yeah, it's spicy. Kind of black pepper on the tail of it as well.
Absolutely.
Isn't it?
Absolutely.
I'm getting lemony as well.
Yeah, I think the lemoniness comes from the underlying spirit. So we actually have multiple spirit recipes that we run in the distillery, but this is our spirit recipe that we designed to be drunk young. We designed it as a young whiskey.
Right.
So fruity and citrusy and pure.
So what happens to the casks once you've used them? In terms of sustainability, what happens to them after that?
We refill them at the moment.
Okay, yeah.
That is obviously not going to happen forever because they have a useful life, but we're too young. A bit like we hadn't thought about packaging in 2017. Honestly, I haven't thought about that for
a couple of years. Like,
10 years time.
Where are we putting these?
Yeah, exactly.
I tell you what, this whiskey is really good.
It's beautiful.
For a young whiskey, it's so good. There is a complexity to it. You're right. It does have a feel like it's a lot older than it is. I'm not sure if you're getting that, Nick, as well.
Yeah, I am. Was that a long fermentation time as well to get that fruitiness?
Yeah, we do. And we use 2 yeasts as well, which is really important in creating that fruitiness. So most distilleries will just use one standard, especially in Scotland, one standard distilling yeast, but we use half standard distilling yeast and half a yeast that originally came from a kind of wine background.
Yeah.
Makes it sound like a career, doesn't it? But you know what I mean? And that drives a lot of the fruitiness because actually a lot of the flavour development that you get in whiskey is in that fermentation process and a relatively long fermentation.
I really, really like this.
It's wonderful. I'm trying to keep a bit back for the soda water at some point.
Yeah, try it with soda. I'd love to hear what you guys think of that as well. And I think that depth and viscosity from the organic side really helps it in the whiskey and soda serve.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something we've been talking about quite a lot recently, actually, that whiskey should be drunk so many different ways. It's a drink at the end of the day, so we shouldn't be snobby about it and say, you should only drink it neat and with no ice and not chilled.
Add water.
Yeah.
On a full moon.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Whereas the reality is every spirit will have a way of drinking it, which is just incredible. And the fact that you've clearly done some research of your own spirit and said, you know what, it really excels with soda is I think it's really nice to see that you've been that forward about it and making it obvious so that we can try it because you've done our homework for us in that sense.
Yeah.
And I find it crazy that we get comments on social media or wherever that it's like express surprise that we've put the recipe for whiskey, we call it Whiskey 6, just 2 parts whiskey, 4 parts soda on the side of the bottle.
Yeah.
Which is really unusual in Scotch, but it's like, I really think that it's important for us as an industry to move away from that rather old school feeling of like, you can only drink it neat. Because I think that's really off-putting for a lot of people. And
it is.
Absolutely.
That's a shame because they're not trying whiskey as a result. And in particular, they're not trying whiskey from Scotland. So
No. I've looked at friends, I say, sniff this, and they go, smells like barbecue sauce, I don't like it. That's it. And they'll never look at it ever again.
Yeah.
But if there's another option, like the Whiskey 6 then
So with the future whiskies you've got, how difficult is it to put stock aside? Did you have a new make which you were like, okay, we're going to put that aside and we're not going to open that for 8 years, or we're going to keep trial it, but we're going to have a 12-year-old, we're going to have a 14-year-old. How many barrels do you hold back, especially when you probably just want to get money because you've been plowing money into this for 8 years and you've finally got a product?
Excellent questions. Well, there's kind of 2 parts to that answer. Remember when I said we made different recipes throughout the year depending on the temperature of the pond? So we have this recipe that we unimaginatively call the old recipe, which is designed to be matured for at least 10 years.
Right.
So we make that in the summer. So the recipe that we're drinking now, which is the new recipe, it's quite important that the cooling water in the condensers is quite cold, because if you don't have cold cooling water, you lose a lot of those higher alcohols and esters, which give you a lot of those nice fruit flavors we were just talking about. Mm-hmm. For the old recipe, we're much less concerned about what the spirit is like overall, because it's going to be in cask for more than 10 years and the wood becomes such a predominant factor that that's a lot of the influence. But also we intentionally have a much lower cut point on that recipe to capture some of the elements that are less attractive in a young spirit, but over a longer period in cask become depth and complexity. Yeah. So that's what we make in summer, because it's much warmer, the cooling water, but we're not worried about capturing what needs cold cooling water. And deciding how much of that recipe to do each year is really hard. There's no right answer. I'll tell you in 20 years' time whether we made the right decision. And then the other challenge is how we quickly or slowly we release the whiskey that we've got, which again, you can only do it by using your best judgment, really. And we're trying to just, build things in the right way and be able to tell our story and get people along rather than just say, oh my God, we've got to sell as much as possible. And we're lucky to have very patient investors who support that.
Yeah, totally. Have you been approached by indie bottlers at all at this stage?
Yes, we have. And we've actually done one release already with Boutique.
Oh,
nice.
and we're about to do another one.
Great.
So we will only ever do them on a really limited scale because honestly, I'd much rather put out stuff under Nc'Nean. I think that indie bottlers are amazing and they can help us get the word out to people that wouldn't otherwise have heard of us, which is awesome. But we just, you can't do too much of it because otherwise you won't have any stock left for your own product.
You're listening to the Whiskey and Things podcast.
I have a left field question here. Basically, we have
love it.
We have Patreons, as we said before we started recording, and our top tier are able to ask questions of our guests. And one of our top tiers, her name's Lauren, and she has sent this question, which I actually think is really delightful. And I don't think Nick or I could have asked this anyway. It comes in a couple of parts, but I really think this is great.
The suspense is killing me.
Right.
I don't know what this is.
At what point did you think that this is what you wanted to do? As a parent, I'm seeing a female distillery founder, and that's very inspiring. But you're making alcohol, so I'm trying to figure out a way of using your story to inspire my kids.
I love it.
Any advice? And it's.
You weren't going to get that question from me or Dave.
No, you wouldn't have got that question from us. That's exactly my point. But it's really true because obviously I think there's a misconception that whiskey is a male industry, and I don't think, from something Nick and I have certainly discovered, that's definitely not the case. The public don't necessarily see that visibility of females.
Definitely,
as
which
much
is
as they
bonkers,
should.
right?
So I think it's a really valid question. But also, how do you turn around to an 8-year-old girl and say, "Look, you can do what you want. There's that woman there. She founds a distillery and making whiskey." It's a trade-off,
whiskey,
isn't it, I suppose?
Yeah, exactly. It's oh god.
Yeah.
So I'll answer the first question first, and then see if I can come up with an answer. You can answer the second bit. So the interesting thing is, when I decided to do it, which is when I left my job at Bain where I used to work, I had and I don't think any entrepreneur really knows or thinks how long they're going to be doing it for. So I sort of thought, well, I'll probably go and set it up and then it will just run itself, right? It's really easy. And then, of course, you realize it's not easy and someone has to run it. And by that point, you're so deep into it that, of course, you're going to carry on doing it. So that's the beauty of the naivety of setting up your business for the first time. But the specific point I decided to do it was when... So I'd done this trip and research and things and thought, God, someone really needs to do this in the whiskey industry and we could do it. I sort of at that point hadn't yet made the connection in my mind of like, well, I'm going to need to leave my job to do it. But then it became basically increasingly apparent that I couldn't do it whilst holding down another job. And it was a bit like, right, well, either one of the members of our family has got to quit their job and do this full time, or we should just stop talking about it because it's a waste of time. And I was looking to leave my job anyway. And literally I had one conversation with my husband and then handed in my notice without thinking about it too much, which I think is like ripping off a plaster is sort of the best way to do it. And then you figure out as you go along. But the other thing is that I wasn't really conscious at that stage of being a woman going into whiskey because I wasn't yet in it. Right. The first task was fundraising it. It's obviously to do with whiskey, but it's not directly to do with whiskey. And it was only much later in the process, more like really when we started making it, that I started getting questions like, well, do you actually like whiskey? I'm like, of course I like whiskey. Why would I be making a product that I didn't like? That's bananas. And then you start to get this insight into this public perception, which is not reflective, I think, of the industry perception, because the industry knows that there's both a lot of women in it and a lot of women that drink whiskey. But there's public perception that women don't like whiskey, which is crazy. And so if by doing this, we can also start changing that perception of it, that would also be awesome.
Absolutely.
Any advice on what to say to her children? I think they must know what whiskey is if you have it in your drinks cabinet. So I think just tell them the truth. If it's any consolation, I have a 3-year-old daughter and she already knows what whiskey is. I can show her pictures of the Nc'Nean whiskey bottle, like when it's in a magazine or something. And she's like, that's Mummy's whiskey. And she's only 3, so I'm sure 8-year-olds will be fine.
That's amazing. Yeah. That is amazing.
The bottle is beautiful. Who designed it? Or what was the thoughts behind that?
We went to a really amazing agency called Fresh Britain, who had never worked in alcohol before, to do it. Right. And that's kind of part of our philosophy, is trying not to do too many things just the way they've always been done, because that's the way they've always been done. So it's also reflected in who we recruit. For example, there are very few people apart from our distillery manager who have experience in the whisky industry already within the team. And I think that just helps keep it fresh and, give new perspectives to how you do things. And so, Fresh Britain were amazing. They have one in particular very talented designer who was in charge of the bottle. But before that became the bottle, we'd done a lot of work on. So Nc'Nean, the name is based on this ancient Gallic goddess Nc'Nean, who was known as a protector of nature and for walking her own path. And so we did a lot of research into her, and a lot of the colours and everything else that we use is based on that. So she lived in a forest, and she's associated with the moon and all that kind of stuff. So it's like forest colours and moonlight, and that's a lot of the inspiration behind it. And then literally the actual foliage on the bottle is all stuff that you find local to the distillery.
Right. What's it short for? The name? Nc'Nean?
Nc'Nean is short for Nc'Nean.
Good. I wanted you to say that and pronounce it, because I tried to pronounce it earlier and I think I butchered it. So,
well, that's why we shortened it to Nc'Nean, because it's like 13 letters and there's not many vowels in there. So,
no, that's great.
Thank you, Annabel, so much for joining us. This has been really eye-opening and wonderful, and the whiskey is fantastic. Yeah. I would definitely be getting myself a bottle of this, because this is absolutely amazing. And good luck with the future and with your future releases, and with the distillery as well. It sounds wonderful.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a fun chat.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Are you open to the public for visiting? Obviously not currently, but in normal times, are you open for visitors and things like that?
We are, for the intrepid souls who make it
we can make
to the distillery. It's worth it, but it is an adventure.
Yeah, we'll add that to our list, Nick.
It's perfect at halfway between Isla and Skye. So
perfect.
But only on the way if you're in a helicopter.
Oh right, yeah.
Or a boat. Otherwise,
Dave.
It's like this.
We get a boat, Dave. Be fun.
Yeah, we'll set up a crowdfunder for that, shall we?
You're listening to Whiskey and Things.
So you can watch the full uncut video of that interview with Annabel on our Patreon page, patreon.com/Whiskey and Things. By the way, we've now changed it. You can now subscribe both monthly and annually, whatever floats your boat, I guess. So go over there, check out the interview, check out the other interviews that are on there and other little bits that we do. And that's, as we said, patreon.com/Whiskey and Things.
Yes, there's a bit more in that video. We go into a bit more detail. We talk about their range of botanical spirit and their YouTube channel and stuff. So more interesting stuff on there.
And of course, you can find out more about Nc'Nean and their range over on their website, Nc'Nean.com, and their social media accounts at Nc'Nean. That's Nc'Nean. Nc'Nean. That's Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, all /Nc'Nean. Whilst you may have been listening to that interview, Nick and I were making ourselves a Nc'Nean Whiskey 6, as recommended by Annabel, which is 2 parts Nc'Nean Single Malt and 4 parts soda water. And when they sent us the sample of the whiskey, they very kindly sent us a little bottle of Fever Tree's premium soda water. So we've both made it, and I'm excited. It smells great, Nick.
It does smell lovely, doesn't it?
Yeah, your ice cubes sound wonderful. Oh, that's really good.
That's really refreshing, isn't it? It's dry.
Really nice.
It's dry.
Yeah.
It's cold and refreshing, and that's really nice.
That's a great summer drink, that, isn't it?
Yes, that might go on the list. Seeing as we can go outside now.
Exactly.
I think all the pubs are actually booked up around here, so I don't know if I'll be actually able to get to a pub garden soon. But that is nice. If you want to purchase a Nc'Nean Organic Single Malt, they go for about $47.95. So I think it's great value.
For this spirit,
what goes into
absolutely. And bear in mind, you're supporting a company which is doing all the right things.
Ethical.
As best as they can. Yeah. For a product which, as Annabel said, is completely luxury and unnecessary. But we love it. And they've done a great job. This is such a great cocktail. Blimey. It's such a simple thing, isn't it? Soda water, whiskey, glass, ice. Boom. Thank you very much.
Something I don't usually do, to be honest. Mixing whiskey into things, apart from, the JDs and stuff. I've never bought a bottle of soda water in my life. But this is really nice. May have changed my ways.
This is super tasty.
Yeah.
So drinkable. Anyway, also, you can find out more about Earth Day, as we said at the start, at earthday.org. And do, this podcast comes out on Wednesday, so it's tomorrow.
Yes.
Celebrate it. Do something. Be nice to the planet on Earth Day. Why not?
Did you ever go to Live Earth back in the day?
No, I didn't. What's Live Earth?
It was a big concert. It was like Live Aid, but it was in Wembley Stadium, and they had like a load of bands and stuff, and it was quite entertaining. Yes, Foo Fighters, Beastie Boys. Who else was there? Chili Peppers, Metallica. They played the next day because they were like, oh well, all this is set up. Why don't we just play Wembley Stadium the next day and leave it all set up? Went to 2 concerts in 2 days at Wembley Stadium. It's great.
Wow.
Back in the day.
Wow.
What was that? 2007. Good Lord. Yes.
Wow. I didn't even hear about that, but sounds great.
There we go. It was a lot of fun. So, Nc'Nean. Thank you to Annabel for coming on. That was wicked.
Absolutely. And do go and check out what they're up to. And if you're ever up that way, go and give them a visit.
In that remote place the distillery is. Good luck.
I think that's all we got this week, isn't it?
That's all we have time for. However long this podcast is, that's all we have time for.
That is all we have time for. There is no time for any more podcasts today.
No, we're coming up to the end. I can see it. Even before I edit it, I can see we have no more time.
No, there's no more time. No. There is no more time. Cut. That would be quite amusing if you did that.
But I'm not, apparently. So yes, thank you for joining us, everyone. Only one thing left to say.
Cheers. Thanks for coming.
Whiskey and Things has been brought to you by And Things Production.